Crack open the champagne here at Silverstone tonight, but that's not going to happen for the next 2 weeks at least. We've just heard in the last hour that Donington has been given an extra fortnight to prove that they've got the means, really, to host Grand Prix racing. You remember last year they won a 17-year contract to host Grand Prix racing, and the British Grand Prix in particular, but they've been struggling, really, to redevelop the circuit, and they missed deadline after deadline. But Bernie Eccleston has given them some more time, so Silverstone waits in the wings, but they've said that they won't host the Grand Prix for just a single year. If they step in, it has to be for a long-term contract. Now, I'll tell you more later on, but time now for the rest of the news from where you live.
It's been a difficult day for people who use the buses in Essex. There was just a skeleton service because of a strike by drivers at first in Essex in a dispute over pay. More strikes are planned.
Chelmsford bus station, and normally 200 drivers are at work here. Today only 15 turned up, and it's a similar story throughout the county. Arriving by train in Colchester, these students weren't sure how to get across town.
We had to go to Whittam and then get the train and then stop here and then get the bus, which is just sitting there, not going anywhere.
I had to wake up really, really early to come in, and because I thought there were not going to be no buses.
Despite the picket line at Colchester bus station, around a quarter of drivers kept a reduced service going. It's members of Unite who are on strike. They say first decision to freeze pay is down to greed.
The company did post a £134 million profit. They managed to pay their shareholders a 10% dividend. It's just the stakeholders want to take their part, their little bit. So that's where we are. The company's not as if they can't afford it.
This is the first in a series of fortnightly walkouts planned by Unite. However, both sides are hoping that negotiations will continue. In the meantime, First are advising their customers to seek alternative forms of transport where they can.
10% of our staff have come into work. We've got some staff from other parts of the company that have come down to help us operate these school services, and that's how it's going to continue throughout the rest of the day.
Members of Unite say workers are struggling to support their families. First have made it clear there'll be no new money this year, but hope they can reach an agreement over next year's pay. Felicity Simper, BBC Look East.
The investigation into the death of a young photographer from Suffolk is reopening. Julie Ward was murdered in a Kenyan game park 21 years ago. Her father says that police in Nairobi have agreed to reopen the case. Despite 2 murder trials, no one has been convicted. A man's been arrested after a hit-and-run incident at Hadley in Suffolk. Chris Corder, who's 42, was critically injured in the crash and is still in a coma. A car's been impounded and the arrested man has been bailed to return to Bury St Edmunds police station in November.
More than 70 people turned out today to protest about a controversial fence on a quayside in Essex. On Saturday, the emergency services were forced to remove part of the fence at Mistley Quay so that a lifeboat crew could rescue 4 people from their boat, which had capsized.
After 30 minutes in the water, Richard Blay is rescued from the River Stour. The lifeboat take him and 3 others to Mistley Quay to an ambulance. You can see a gap in the fencing which a Coast Guard officer has just removed with bolt cutters.
Mistley Quay is one of the very few accessible points on this side of the river, and unless you can access that quay, you could have to go in a boat a lot further, and that extra 10 minutes or so could make all the difference to survival.
Free the quay!
Today, local people marched on the offices of the quay's owners, TW Logistics, to hand in a letter demanding the 6-foot fence be removed. Erected 13 months ago for safety reasons, but now, say campaigners, it's a safety hazard.
The Coast Guard lost at least 10 minutes and needed the help of locals to get the fence down before they could get sailors who were suffering from hypothermia onto land and off to hospital.
Harwich Lifeboat today acknowledged that the Mistley Fence could force them one day to divert casualties to another landing site.
There's many quays we can't get onto and we have to pick a different landing site. We look for somewhere else.
How far afield would you have to go if you couldn't get onto the quay?
The nearest one for us would be 6 miles down to Parkston Quay.
And for an injured sailor, extra miles could be critical. The quay's owners wouldn't comment, but they say they are liaising with the emergency services. Local people are determined to have access to a quay which has been in public use for centuries, and they say they'll take their fight over the fence to the High Court. Alex Dunlop, BBC Look East, Mistley in Essex.
The youngest Member of Parliament has been sworn in this afternoon. Chloe Smith won the Norwich North for the Conservatives after the Labour MP, Dr Ian Gibson, resigned during the expenses row.
It's a fun title to be baby of the house, but actually I'd be perfectly willing to hand it on to somebody else come the next election. I think it's all about doing a good job rather than being the youngest while you're there.
An appeal is underway to raise £100,000 for a statue of Cardinal Wolsey in Ipswich. Wolsey was born in the town and went on to become one of the most powerful men in England under Henry VIII.
The Wolsey consort from Ipswich School in St Peter's Church. This place is much as Wolsey would have known it. Thomas Wolsey was born in Ipswich in 1471. Under Henry VIII, he went on to become a politician, a cardinal, and a very powerful man.
He was, after all, a sort of one-man government, like Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair.
Because he did everything.
He did everything, and the king was busy with other things.
A committee will choose from a shortlist of 7 artists who've submitted designs for the statue. The cost, around £100,000.
You know, artworks are expensive, and I think if we want something of quality, we ought to pay that sort of price. I think that's very reasonable.
It's hoped the money can be raised quickly and the statue to what the project is calling Ipswich's greatest son be unveiled in a year's time. Mike Liggins, BBC Look East, Ipswich.
In the election for a new mayor for Bedford.
Today, the Conservative leader David Cameron came to visit. Nikki Jenkins was there.
Not the only ones banging their drums in Bedford this morning. David Cameron was there to drum up support for Parvez Akhtar, the Conservative candidate for mayor, elected in an open primary.
Said I would come. Democracy means opening things up, letting go control, allowing local people the choice. That's what we did, and we ended up with a first-class candidate. Good morning.
While his colleagues in Westminster were busy working out who'd be repaying what in the expenses row, Mr Cameron joined an over-50s creative writing class.
Hard to resist. Her lips sent a message inviting his, saying, "I want to be kissed."
This recitation of late flowering lust may have had him wishing he'd stayed to do the maths.
And how do you think he took your poem?
Well, he hasn't taken it. He wants it to be sent to him.
All politicians sound alike now, don't you? Sometimes look at them. They even look alike, never mind sound alike, some of them, you know.
Who could she mean? Nick Clegg was in Bedford at the weekend to back up the Lib Dem candidate.
If Dave Hodgson becomes elected, as I very much hope he will, as mayor for Bedford, I want him to put Bedford as his top priority, not the Liberal Democrats. It is Bedford, Bedford, Bedford that should be his absolute priority.
But no sign of Mr Brown, leaving Labour to try and take the moral high ground.
The Labour Party nationally does understand that this is a local election. David Cameron, by coming here today, is showing that he's more interested in the national agenda, and I don't think that's in tune with what we need.
Bedfordians have a love of independence. Can the political parties convince them that they have the town's well-being at heart? Nikki Jenkins, BBC Look East.